Broadcasting from the Symphony studio in Marietta, Georgia, it's time for the Technology Harmony podcast, brought to you by Symphony Technology Solutions. Tune in every week as we spotlight the very best minds in our industry. Now, here are your hosts.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 6th episode of the Technology Harmony podcast, brought to you by Symphony Technology Solutions. I'm your host, Symphony's marketing manager, Katie Galley. In this series, we speak with and learn from the top thought leaders in the property technology space. In the Symphony studio with us today, we have Senior Vice President of Product and Market Strategy at JMA Wireless, Greg Dial. How are you doing, Greg?
Great. How are you?
I am doing awesome. Thank you so much for stopping by and
glad
sharing your story.
to be here. Glad to be here.
We're really glad to have you here too, Greg. And so just to get to know your background a little bit,
Sure.
Can you tell us a little bit about your professional journey and how you got the job that you have today with JMA?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in wireless or general technology for about 20 years. So started with Lucent Technologies, which then became Alcatel-Lucent, which is now Nokia Networks, but basically started, my journey right out of college. My father was actually in telecom for 30 years, so it was kind of in the family. So it was a easy career choice to make. I've always been around technology, love technology, and just how it's evolved. So started on the vendor equipment side with Lucent, and actually it was an international focused jobs when international network operators were building 3G networks at the time. I was a part of a team of 2 or 3 people that went out and actually helped plan and build those networks. So essentially a lot of network planning with the technology. It took me to a lot of great places. So largely through my 20s was going through India, Africa, Southeast Asia. So it was really an interesting way to see the world, see how these different networks were built, and how the technology was being used in different parts of the world. So was there until about 2007, then moved to Verizon Wireless. Was with Verizon for 12 years, pretty broad set of roles there. So product development, worked on their voice over LTE expansion, some of their cloud products, some of their communications products that probably many of the listeners use today. And then moved over into the more traditional network side, right? So planning the 4G and 5G network build, much of which is continuing on today. And that's really where I got introduced to JMA. So, saw their virtualized radio products, right? So they have a software-based solution that was cutting edge for its time, maybe a little bit ahead of its time, for some of the networks, that were building these technologies. But there was a really significant promise of where that road was going with network technology, really moving from hardware-based solutions to software-based solutions, and just some of the flexibility that network providers need, and that some of these enterprises are also going to need when we talk about private wireless and CBRS and some of the things we'll get into later. So I had the opportunity to join JMA. So joined about midway through 2019. So I've been here for about a year. It's been it's been a great journey so far. A lot of learnings along the way, and really excited about the product set that we have. So. Anyway, that brings us to current day.
Yeah, to today. And that's cool that you got to see, early on kind of the future, where JMA would head. And so, Greg, can you maybe shed some light on maybe what JMA stands for and
Sure.
kind of what exactly you guys do?
Yeah, exactly. So we're a pretty broad company, and the evolution is really pretty unique. So we are U.S. Designed and manufactured, which in the telecom world is pretty rare, right? I mean, we've seen a lot of the discussions around non-U.S. based entities, specifically Chinese entities, and some of the impact that we've seen from some of the concerns around things like security. So being U.S. made, designed, and manufactured, 100% onshore is really pretty significant, and something that we really take a lot of pride in. JMA really has 3 product lines, or really 3 product focuses. One is on what we call passive network gear. So the antennas that you see that are, on large cell towers, we provide antenna technology, as well as some of the advanced cabling that connects the antennas to the radios. We've been doing that again, here in the U.S. For the last number of years. Our second piece is our large venue systems. So our Teco distributed antenna system products, which your company is certainly familiar with.
Yep.
So basically, large stadiums, high rises, casinos, any large footprint area that needs a distributed antenna system, or coverage, multi-tenant coverage, right? So the ability for all carriers to plug in a neutral host fashion, and provide service to their customers. We facilitate that through advanced antenna technology in these buildings. So instead of having to build multiple networks on top of each other, we provide a mechanism for each of the carriers to feed into a common system. So that's the second part of the portfolio. The third part of the portfolio is really, what gets me excited, which is the software-based solutions on the wireless network side, or what I would call the active side of the portfolio. So we have, as mentioned, we have a software baseband called XRAM, which basically takes all of the custom hardware capability and moves it into 100% software that runs on what we call common off-the-shelf gear, or x86 gear for the tech heads out there. But basically, what that allows you to do is decouple solutions from specific hardware, right? Which is expensive. It's difficult to replace that technology. And moving from hardware to software is something that we've seen, across the industry a number of times, right? You've seen it with some of the wireline, types of solutions over the last number of years. You've certainly seen it with the rise of data centers, right? And the ability to do things in a more virtualized manner as opposed to a very static manner. So the virtualized baseband, this XRAM platform, is really the kind of the flagship product that's running our virtualized RAN network. On top of that, we have some radio products as well. So we have a mid-band radio that supports CBRS, which is really significant for the enterprise private wireless offering, called Cell Hub. So that's a full bandwidth. Think of it as an industrial grade private wireless platform that pairs with the XRAM baseband. So it basically gives you an end-to-end solution for some of these advanced in-building systems or enterprises that are looking to do their own private wireless systems. And then finally, we have in development, in the final stages of development, a millimeter wave, which is what Verizon and others call ultra wideband, right? So when you see the devices that are getting multi-gigabit speeds, that's generally millimeter wave technology, which is new for 5G, of course. We are developing or are close to releasing an indoor version of that. So basically taking what is being done outdoors today, and using some specific technology to make that work better indoors. With millimeter wave technology, it's very difficult to, it reflects off of a lot of things. It's not as resilient in penetrating buildings. It's a very sensitive frequency, but with a sensitive frequency, you also get a tremendous amount of capability. So basically, we've been able to put that in a form factor that can be placed indoors, and take that, really the promise of 5G, the multi-gigabit speeds, the ultra low latency, and move that into an indoor environment. So again, passive side of the portfolio with antennas and connectors, large venue systems, and then the active portfolio that I just went through, which is really where my focus has been.
Okay, and that was my follow-up, is where for you specifically as the Senior Vice President with Product and Market Strategy, do you take a hand in kind of all three of those verticals, or is it primarily
No, I do. And really where I spend a lot of my time is really taking the specifics of the technology, right? The technical nomenclature, if you will, and put it into, taking features and explaining them to the layman, right? So when you go to a building owner, or when you go to an enterprise, being able to take a tech data sheet, right, and specs, and say, well, this is what it means to you. This is what you can do with this technology. This is how much space and power savings it's going to mean. These are the types of applications you can run on these systems. That's really where I spend a lot of my time, is taking the very detailed features and functionalities and boiling that down into snack size or easily digestible either use cases or basically putting that into what that can mean for future capabilities for a building owner, a venue, whatever it may be.
So it's essentially you're bridging that gap, that kind of educational gap. So it's like taking that really maybe that high level language and putting it in a way that someone might understand. So it's why it's directly applicable to them specifically.
Sure. I mean, look, everybody loves technology, but technology doesn't mean anything unless you understand what it can do for you. So, I try and bounce some of the ideas. There's no better, critic than, like people in your family, right? So if you can explain, how you're going to explain how a cell site works or how an in-building system works, very different to a network engineer than you're going to explain it to your husband or wife or parents, right? So, I mean, it's really kind of towing the line between those two things, because I think one of the things that we do in the industry is, especially on the engineering side, is we just assume that everybody understands, the endless acronyms. Everybody understands, the basics of the technology. And I think sometimes, going into the basics and why something that is new is better, in clear, plain language is really, where the starting point needs to be, right? Because technology by itself is just technology. It's really, being able to do creative use cases and show how this changes the lives of end users, right? That's really what it's all about. So that's really where I spend a lot of my time, is boiling things down into use cases. My traditional schooling is on the business side, but I found myself managing product development teams or network planning or whatever it may be, with an obvious need to understand the underpinnings of the technology. But I always try and look at it from a business first type of viewpoint, which is how our customers are going to look at it. So that's primarily my main focus, and honestly what I really enjoy to do.
Yeah, and I mean that makes a lot of sense, being able to bridge that gap, and then too the fact that you genuinely enjoy doing that.
Yes.
So it makes it easier.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, and it's also drawing the parallels of taking something out of our, kind of wireless technology world and bridging that to something that, the average person or the non-technical person can understand, right? So, in simple terms, the way I think of, some of these software transformations that are going on in the industry, one of the ways I think about it is, think about how, when you used to watch movies, right? What would you do? And I don't know if you're old enough to remember Blockbuster, but
Yeah, I do.
when I was growing up, it was either VHS, which you probably don't remember, but DVDs, and the model for viewing movies was, you had this hardware based CD player and you had this hardware based disc, right? And you would go and rent it, and you'd have to return it. And then Netflix came along, and they started obviously with DVDs, but really they took that hardware model and they moved it to a software type solution, right? And now it's just like, I can't even remember a time or the inconvenience of actually having to go somewhere to go rent something or check something out and then provide it back if it's not available within a couple of seconds on your fingertips. It's almost like it's too much effort to do that. And really that's kind of at the crux of what we're doing with the wireless networks, is instead of having to base something in a very specific hardware model, we've been able to decouple that and do it in software. So we can move faster. We can do it in a much more kind of technology first fashion. We're focused 100% on the software, as opposed to having to solve the software problem and the hardware problem. Mm-hmm. There are plenty of great companies out there that provide tremendous hardware, and there's no reason why we can't utilize that, just like every other technology company out there that's doing it, whether it's managing internet traffic or delivering video content or even another example is just imagine when we used to have cameras with film, right? I mean, God forbid that whole process. And then it all basically became software, right? It became obviously you still have a camera on your smartphone, but essentially that became software, right? So I just see that those same parallels, and again, those are very kind of basic, kind of average Sally and Joe examples, but I really do think it is that simple, moving from these locked environments to these open environments. And software just doesn't mean software from one company, right? Software can mean the ability to mix and match solutions, right? So nobody's cornered the market on every single software solution out there. So the ability to mix and match is really what these future networks are going to be, and what the promise of these either software-based or open architecture pushes in the industry. And really, wireless is one of the last places where we don't do that. And there's really no reason why that revolution shouldn't start now.
So I guess in light of that, with recent events, I mean, with the coronavirus and kind of
Sure.
in the last few months, seeming that technology has really picked up the pace because out of necessity, things have really started to take off. Do you see anything specifically within the wireless industry that has started to shift or needs to really start to shift because of the impact of COVID?
Yeah, I think, and it's not all directly COVID related, but I mean, if just to continue down the parallel that I drew a couple of minutes ago, if the wireline networks, right, if you think about the data center model, right, if they operated the way they operated 5 years ago and COVID came along, some of these networks would be brought to their knees, right? So a key piece of being able to manage the traffic is to be able to manage the traffic in a dynamic fashion, right? So people are not only consuming more, but they're consuming it in different places, right? So if you think about a static network that is serving an office park, if they can't move those resources to support more of a suburban area through what we call an SD-WAN or a software-defined wide area network, or in some cases a wired network, these networks would be taxed beyond belief, right? So the ability to move resources across the network to different places and for different functions is critical. So while the wireline side of the business has adapted to that, the wireless side of the business continues to catch up. So I think some of the things, and we spend a lot of time with customers either on the commercial real estate side or on the manufacturing side. And there's a couple of parallels that I think continue throughout the conversation. One is applications are getting closer and closer to the user, right? So with applications being more intelligent, they generally need to communicate with some central server or some kind of intelligent engine in a much faster manner, right? And in our world, we call that latency, right? The ability to move traffic from one side of the network or from one endpoint to the other. So the ability to move applications and some of the compute power closer to the user, you start to close the loop between the application, the intelligence, and the person using an application. So if you think about some of these intelligent buildings, right, that are having to make decisions around energy management, that are having to make decisions around IoT sensors in their building, the overall efficiency that these buildings need to run has never been more important, right? You have more people in these buildings. I'd argue, especially with the current climate, there's a lot of interest in added security, right? So smart cameras, things like that. Unless you have a system that can flexibly onboard those emerging solutions and allow them to run in such a way that you can guarantee quality of service, right? Because you're talking video and really high usage applications, you really need that flexibility, right? So having the intelligence closer to the user, what we call the edge of the network, right, has never been more important, and it's hard to do that in a hardware-based environment, right? I mean, obviously you're running on standard hardware, You can't run this just out of thin air, but the ability to run it flexibly on different locations and with the ability to very quickly scale, that's more important. So that ability to scale is also an important element of software.
Right.
So, I would say elements closer to the user, a massive amount of flexibility, right? Where you're putting the horsepower, the network behind, depending on where people are. And then really more intelligence, right? So, we talked to some of these, commercial real estate, builders, for example, or building managers. And, when you talk about things like social distancing, and some of the other COVID related things that have kind of been, thrust upon us, there's no reason why that can't be solved through wireless technology, right? I mean, the smartphones that are in your hand are so incredibly powerful, and they have so many sensors, and they can tell exactly where you are. Whether it's being able to contact trace or manage social distancing requirements, or just being able to tell, quite honestly, how many people on average are in your building and where are they, right? I mean, that's an important thing to know. And then also the security angle of being able to manage not only physical security but data security as well is incredibly important. And that's why one of the things that we spend a lot of time on is the security around these networks. And quite frankly, where I think a lot of these enterprises are very, very interested in getting on board with enterprise private wireless is the ability to own and manage the data that goes through their network. This gives them the ability to do that. It's true network ownership. But those are the kind of things that I see, more, the emergence of, and even more insatiable need for data, right, on the network, and understanding how networks are being used, how they're being utilized, the flexibility to move things around, and then quite honestly getting, applications closer to users. A perfect example is just reading an article on cloud gaming, right? So gaming is up, greater than 50% on a lot of these networks, which is understandable because people,
Right.
are generally not leaving their homes, or at least where I am in the Northeast, people are pretty much homebound.
Yeah.
So being able to deliver, an online gaming experience, the quality of those games, right, and the performance of those games and that online experience is really dependent upon, really two things. One, what's the overall bandwidth on the system, right? Because these are intense, types of applications, and how, close are you to the user, right? I mean, if you're trying to play a real time cloud-based action game, and you have to communicate with a server that is hundreds of miles away, the gaming experience isn't going to be great, right? You're going to see this latency, or in the gaming world, this lag, and it's just not going to be a good experience. So, being able to get those elements closer to the user is really the one thing that I think is going to continue to emerge, and that we've started to see some very real use cases, not only in light of COVID, but just with just this need to get more data to users in a simpler way.
Right. And that definitely makes a lot of sense. And like you said, it wasn't necessarily that COVID started it, but it was already kind of in the works. But it was definitely, I guess, kind of a catalyst, maybe.
For sure. I mean,
Yeah.
COVID has I see it as a broader impact to just the overall need for just the requirement of connectivity, right? And the requirement of quality connectivity. Today it's Wi-Fi for many of us. I think CBRS and these enterprise private wireless networks are going to be complementary to that. You're certainly going to start seeing them in industrial settings. You're going to start seeing those private networks in sports and entertainment venues, and high-rise areas, and places like casinos and things like that. So it's just another tool in the toolbox to improve upon what already is a very connected world out there. But the U.S. really has a unique opportunity here with enterprise private wireless. It's just such a large amount of bandwidth that's available, and we're incredibly excited to work with enterprises of all sizes with private wireless.
So is private wireless then something that is going to take off sooner rather than later? Has it already started to really start to
Yeah,
move?
it is fairly new, right? So it was spectrum that was made available, by the U.S. government within the last 12 months, right? So it was in an elongated trial phase. I mean, we've seen just a tremendous amount of interest with this. Anything that's connectivity related is generally going to get the focus of the CIOs or the IT department. But no, I think it's going to take off sooner rather than later. I think you're going to see it more, what I call kind of upstream in some of these larger, more, either densely packed areas, whether it be some of these large venues, right? Because there's an immediate use for that.
Right.
Or certainly in things like precision or smart manufacturing. The not so much. It's not. I don't see it as a Wi-Fi replacement. I actually see it as more complementary, and that's kind of a raging debate here in the industry. But what it can do is it's much better at providing mobility, right? Because it's a traditional wireless technology. So it inherently supports mobility in a robust, high bandwidth indoor type of environment. And then it also gives you the ability to do what we call network slicing, right? So you have a pretty extensive way to do different levels of service, right? So you can give a different priority of service to an automated machine on the factory floor versus someone using it for standard data internet access versus somebody that's running a security camera, right? So the ability to slice and dice these networks, given the amount of bandwidth possible, is really what has us excited and why we've built our platform to be software flexible, but then also robust enough that it covers the full CBRS band, right? So this isn't like taking another version of a Wi-Fi hotspot and putting it on the wall. Nothing wrong with that. There's certainly applications where you would want to have more of an access point style deployment, but really our focus has been more on the upmarket side. And as with any new technology turn, it's going to take a while.
Mm-hmm.
But the interest here, I've seen more interest. I mean, in the 20 years that I've been in the industry, I've seen more interest broadly on private wireless than probably any other technology. Certainly since the launch of LTE back in 2010. So it's definitely the largest thing that I've seen in terms of how broad the interest is, right? I mean, 5G is obviously this enormous thing that's out there. This CBRS, private wireless is something that can just be taken advantage of in very unique ways. And again, I think it's the ability to own these networks on the enterprise side you've never really had that before, right? You've had Wi-Fi, but it's never really been a true standards-based wireless network. And it's just a different animal. And a lot of this is just how we operate, right? So we're a privately held company. We take a very long-term view of things. Mm-hmm. So we started on this software-based path, not just because one customer asked for it, or we saw a couple of use cases that were interesting. I mean, we saw this as the future of a variety of different platforms. It could be carrier networks. It could be some of these large in-building networks. It could be these private wireless networks. But the one common thing was we needed to evolve into something that was software-based, right? And something that was open, where we can embrace different types of technology. And quite honestly, we're not shy about, working with, any option out there. If a customer says, hey, look, I like your software-based baseband, but you don't have the complementary radio that I need for this form factor or to be able to broadcast outdoors, we're 100% open, right? With working with the industry on, really solving the customer's problems. And we don't pretend to have a solution for every single use case out there. We certainly have a flexible platform that can evolve to many of them, but in some cases it's about partnership as well. So we're partnering pretty broadly across the industry to make this happen.
Well, Greg, if somebody wanted to learn more about you, about JMA and everything you guys are doing, where might they do that?
Sure. I think a good place to start is jmawireless.com. So you get all of our, our company history, our product stories. You can, download a whole host of different media that's out there, including this podcast, I'm sure,
Yep.
As well as on your site. But really, that's probably the best place to start. Happy to field any direct questions. You can get me at gdial@jmawireless.com. Happy to answer any questions, any interest, anything I can do for those out there that want to take the technical elements and break them down into, snack size, palatable stories. I love doing it, love talking technology. So I was happy to be here today. Appreciate the time. And, thanks again.
Thank you all for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. To learn more about our guest and their company, check out the show notes for the relevant links. If you would like to learn more about us here at Symphony, of course, subscribe to our podcast on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook at Symphony Technology Solutions and on Instagram at Symphony Tech Solutions. Here at Symphony, our ultimate goal is to make harmonious music out of all the technological noise. And we hope today's episode helped in doing just that. See you next time.